Welcome to Athens Happens. I'm Ben Peters, managing editor at The New Political. Athens Happens is a weekly news podcast brought to you by reporters at TNP who are dedicated to explaining the nuances of Athens and state politics. You can find new episodes every Friday at thenewpolitical.com, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, SoundCloud, or wherever else podcasts can be downloaded. This week, Democratic congressional candidates Joel Newby and Daniel Kilgore participated in a forum where they talked about electability, jobs, the environment, and Athens. The Board of Elections' decision to disqualify Representative Jay Edwards' Democratic opponent for the Ohio House of Representatives, and Ohio University's recently announced Esports facility and the economic opportunities it might afford students. Staff writer Delaney Murray on a forum hosted by the League of Women Voters for Democratic congressional candidates Joel Newby and Daniel Kilgore. How are you, Delaney?
I'm good. I'm happy to be back so soon.
Yeah? You were on last week.
I was, yes.
Oh, it's a back-to-back.
I know, it's back-to-back.
So you and I both went to this forum last night, actually.
Yeah, we did.
So what did these candidates discuss? Explain to the audience.
So there were many different discussions. So the way the forum worked is we got to ask some press questions, myself, and then the messenger and the post all got to ask questions. And then the audience could write in questions and give it to the moderator, and then she could read questions. And so that was the majority of the meeting. So I would say topics covered a pretty wide range. So there was a lot of focus on the economy and jobs, and particularly infrastructure. Both the candidates seemed to have a heavy focus on infrastructure and getting broadband. In particular, Newby really wants to focus on getting broadband access to rural areas so that they can access, the internet, and job hunting on the internet is a big part of that. Also, redoing roads, redoing railways, things like that. Railways, sorry. And so that's a big focus. They also want to focus on farming and agriculture. So a lot of them have a focus on focusing on small family farms as opposed to big corporate farms, and that came up quite a bit. Especially because the area they're going to be serving, a lot of areas surrounding Athens are very rural areas and might have some farming communities and farming families. So that's, important because a lot of the farms around here are local. So that was a big focus. There was also a lot of talk about the environment. And so they talked about green energy, in particular Newby, but also Kilgore. They want to funnel jobs into solar and wind energy as opposed to fracking. They're both anti-fracking. They were also they wanted to change the discussion we have around climate change and focus on more green energy and focus on the science that they believe is behind climate change. So that came up quite a bit. I would say those are the main issues that came up, but also just a few things I had written down. At one point, they had a question about women's rights. They're both supportive of the Equal Rights Amendment, which I believe the voting deadline just expired for that, but they are both in support of it or something like it. They're both in support of equal pay. I believe they're both pro-choice candidates. They also discussed the opioid crisis. They discussed gun control and what they want to do with that. They discussed their approach to Medicaid and healthcare. And so those were issues that all came up. They were just, I would say they're like topics that was one question focused. It didn't come up several times, but those were a few things they addressed. And also generally like how they wanted to address funding in Congress and working with bipartisan issues and working with people across the aisle. How they would work in Congress also came up quite a bit. So I would say they covered a pretty wide range of things, but I definitely noticed quite a few trends popping up throughout the evening.
Yeah, it was kind of touch and go in terms of the policies being discussed. But I think that what really they were focusing the most on was the question of electability. Who is the best candidate to defeat Steve Stivers in an election, in a general election? And I think a lot of that, the reason for that was because of the audience who were there. It was a lot of elderly people, particularly elderly women.
Right.
And both of them were kind of giving their stump speeches of electability of, their personal narratives. This was the thing that they kept coming back to as to why they're the ones who can take on this Republican incumbent who's, pretty powerful and has been in office for a long time.
Right, exactly. And I feel like the main thing that differentiates these two candidates are their personal stories, because I think the two of them do have a lot of similar views, which I think is to be expected with Democratic candidates, right? It's like, it's pretty common for Democratic candidates to, believe in climate change, to want to push for greener energy, to be pro-choice, to be pro, equal pay, to have similar sort of approaches to those kinds of issues. I think what really differentiates them is their personal stories. So Newby is very much focused on that. He's, a hometown guy. He went to OU. He grew up in Pickaway County. He currently lives in Columbus in the 15th district. And I think he relates a lot to the area, but also he talks a lot about his qualifications. He's an attorney, so he talks about his ability to debate and talk with people and the skills he has from that offset. So that's the way he brands himself, so to say. And then Kilgore kind of brands himself as just sort of the everyday man, the average Joe. He has really focused on how he currently works full-time at a call center. He's talked about in the past he was working 2 jobs and he was still homeless. He was raised by his grandparents. So he really grew up in this financial sort of struggle, and then he's still dealing with that as an adult. He's also talked a lot about how he's an openly gay candidate. He didn't talk about that as much last night. I don't know if that was because of the audience or just the talking points at hand. But he's really built himself as sort of different in that area, is that he relates to struggles that a lot of voters are going through, particularly financial struggles. And I feel like that's more so how he brands himself, because it should be noted that he lives outside of the 15th district currently. So I feel like he doesn't have as many tangible connections to the area. He has talked about how he works very closely with areas in the 15th district because he does live in Columbus, just outside the district, from my understanding.
Yeah.
So I feel like he has less connections to the area itself, but I feel like he is trying to make personal connections with people's experience and what they're going through. And I feel like those are the main differences I noticed between the candidates, because particularly last night, I think they were hitting a lot of the same points. And like you mentioned, I think that was because of the audience that was there. I think they were trying to appeal to a particular audience, but I really noticed that their personal stories and the reasons that they think they are electable, those really differ between the two of them.
Yeah, what was interesting is that we did Q&A interviews, reporter Zach Zimmerman did, with both of these candidates on the New Political. And if you go through and you read the transcripts of the interview, they seem like very different candidates with very different ideas. Kilgore comes off as more of a progressive Democrat, and Newby comes off as kind of a centrist, advocating for incremental change rather than radical change. And I was listening to both of them speak last night, and I was just having a really hard time. If these were 2 candidates who I knew nothing about, who I was just having exposure for the first time as a voter, I would be asking myself, what are the difference between these guys? Like, other than their personal stories, is they're saying the same thing. Newby, for example, in our interview that we did with him, said that he was not for single-payer healthcare, Medicare for all. He said that he was in favor of expanding Obamacare, but then last night he said that he was in favor of Medicare for all. So he switched on that. He seems to be moving toward Kilgore's position on that, and far away from Steve Stiver's position on that issue. But what I found the most interesting really was their demeanor toward each other. Steve Stiver, or I'm sorry, not Steve Stivers. He wasn't there.
No, he was there in spirit. They did talk a lot about Steve Stivers.
They so the rules of the forum wouldn't allow them to respond to each other. It was not supposed to be a debate, in quote. It was supposed to be them just speaking to the audience about their ideas and their platform. But every time Kilgore would make a comment, Newby would stand up to answer the question, and he would make like a kind of a jab at something that Kilgore said, like a real low-key response to something he said.
I did notice that, yes.
In kind of a hostile way. And Kilgore was more, sitting there quietly with his hands folded. He seemed a little bit timid in comparison. So I was just interested in the interplay between these 2 candidates. One who seemed to be really, on the offensive, and the other who looked like he didn't want to be in the fray at all, and he just wanted to talk to voters and give his shtick to them.
Right. And that could totally be different experience because, like I mentioned, Newby is an attorney. So maybe he's just used to that sort of, public speaking and that sort of like back and forth debate sort of style, even in a forum like this. But I did definitely notice that it seemed like they were kind of on the edge of debating at some places, or it seemed like Newby was on the edge of debating. So that was kind of an interesting dynamic to watch throughout the evening, kind of how they played off each other.
Were there any questions asked by the audience or reporters, one of us, that you thought were particularly interesting, that elicited a particularly interesting answer?
Yeah, so I think one of the most interesting questions last night is they got this question, which first of all started with, if you're not comfortable answering, you don't have to, which is a very interesting way to start a question at a forum. But they asked the candidates, what candidate they were supporting as a Democratic nominee for president, like who they were going to be voting for, in the presidential primaries. And Newby said Warren, which didn't really surprise me because I feel like there are very similar candidates that are sort of appealing to maybe sort of that like centrist or like more traditional Democrats. They both seem to have like very firm plans in place. that didn't really surprise me. But what did surprise me was that Kilgore said that he was also a Warren supporter and leaning a little towards Sanders as well. And from my understanding of just Kilgore on his, social media and what he's talked about in the past, he seems to be a very firm Sanders supporter. So I don't know if he's, changed his views since then, done more research, because I know we're all doing research right on the candidates. I feel like, my personal views, I feel like change week to week, day to day, depending on what comes out.
Sure.
So it could totally be a change of view. It could be appealing to the audience, like we mentioned. A lot of older people were there, so maybe he was appealing to an older crowd. Sanders usually isn't popular with older crowds, is a college crowd maybe. So I don't know necessarily why he said that, or if that's firmly what he believes, but that was definitely an interesting question, and it was also a very interesting way that could have differentiated them a little bit more, because I feel like the presidential candidates are so different. So I feel like whoever they support, I feel like that says a lot about their own personal policies, but they gave the same answer with maybe Kilgore leaning a little more towards Sanders. So I think that was a very interesting question to ask and very insightful, because I think that's what a lot of people are focusing on in politics right now. So I feel like it's kind of an easier way to kind of, see what they're feeling in politics at the moment. So that was a very interesting question.
Yeah, that to me, that was also the most interesting thing of the entire event, really.
Right.
It reminded me a lot of, I don't know if you remember or not, but I think it was the second Democratic presidential debate this past summer. They asked all the candidates on stage, raise your hand if you support Medicare for all, and it created this very visual divide among the candidates up on stage of who is a actual progressive candidate and who's maybe not so far to the left and wants to advocate for more moderate positions, such as a public option or expanding Obamacare. And I heard that question asked. It was asked by an audience member, and my first thought was like, "Oh wow, we're finally going to get to see these candidates differentiate themselves," because, like you said, this sounds like a really great way to, draw a distinction between them, and we didn't really get that, which I was a little bit disappointed by. But as is life.
Right, exactly. But I think that was the most interesting question, because I feel like a lot of them are very, I don't want to say they're like par for the course questions, because they're important questions, but I feel like it's pretty standard to ask about, the opioid crisis in this particular area. It's pretty typical to ask about gun control, healthcare, jobs is going to come up in every single candidate debate probably for the rest of time, right? So it's all things like that I think are pretty I think it was expected that those were going to be asked. I thought it was interesting also, there were several questions about, how are you going to work across party lines? How are you going to collaborate with other people in Congress? How do you plan to get that done? Because I feel like a lot of the issues we currently have in Congress is people not being able to work across party lines. So it seemed like that was important to a lot of people. So it was interesting that they got asked about that a couple times. So that was another interesting question. But yeah, that presidential candidate question, that's I think the one that we talked about most in Newsroom last night. And I think that's the one that stuck with us the most. Yeah.
To your point about when they were asked about how they plan to work across party lines, I thought that was also another moment that was kind of telling the difference between these two candidates on a personal level,
right?
Where Kilgore gave a very, a warm response where he said, I view people not by party lines. I view them as individuals willing to work with me to try to, create policy to benefit everybody. And Newby, it was one of those moments where he was kind of going on the offense. He made the point that Kilgore was a little bit naive, saying like, we're working with Republicans like Jim Jordan, who aren't willing to work across party lines. He didn't explicitly say it, but he said in a matter of words, what Kilgore is proposing is ineffectual, essentially. So I thought that was a really interesting point that did kind of show these two people are different in a sense.
Right, yeah. And I think it should be noted that Newby, I think, focused a lot on sort of issues that would appeal to maybe centrists or Republicans. I think he brought it up in quite a few questions. I think it might have been a healthcare question where he said, I know this solution will appeal to Republicans because, and I think he brought that up with climate change and with infrastructure. He brought that up a few times where he's like, oh, this is something that I know is going to appeal to Republicans, or this is how I plan to appeal to Republicans or appeal to centrists. I think at one point he said, like, I want to appeal to people that are kind of down the middle to centrist voters. So it's, a moment like that I think is very distinctive of kind of how he plans to work with things. And again, it might be just how he approaches politics. It might be his training as an attorney where he's used to kind of having compromise and everything like that. So it could be interesting to kind of see how they work, because it definitely seems like Kilgore is very focused on getting to know people at that personal ground level, and then Newby is a little more strategic. And I'm not saying either of those things are bad things, they're just different things. So it's very interesting to see how they approach them.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Delaney?
No, it was a very interesting forum, and like I said, I think it was a very particular audience and very particular setting last night. So I think sort of as the primaries go forward, and if they, have more chances to speak, I know they're going to be on the podcast. That's a plug in a little bit. So I think, getting to see them talk in different settings and talk more about their policies and their approaches to things, I think it's going to be very different, kind of how they differentiate themselves and how they assert their policies in the future. So I think this was just one small piece of a very long political process, but it was very interesting to watch for sure.
Yeah, it was in a very small little community center room. The audience was tiny. I mean, there were like 20 people.
It was a small audience, but quite a few questions came from them. So I think they were very dedicated voters for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And next Saturday, I think we will be recording our forum with them in the podcast studio to be on Athens Happens. So it'll be in 2 weeks.
Yeah, it'll come out on the 28th.
28th? Yeah, it'll be available 28th. We're recording it, and then it'll go up that following Friday, as with any episode of the podcast. Thank you, Bo Kuhn.
No problem.
Thanks, Bo.
Well, thank you so much, Delaney. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
After the ad, staff writer Abby Neff is going to be interviewing me about a story I wrote because I cannot interview myself.
Hey Athens Happens listeners, Sarah Donaldson here. I'm the digital managing editor at The New Political. I just wanted to jump on and say that TNP has truly shaped my college experience. When I joined as a staff reporter a year and a half ago, I never would have imagined myself gaining so much professional experience or meeting so many close friends. We're an award-winning, independent, nonpartisan publication run entirely by students at Ohio University, and we're dedicated to providing solid coverage of campus, city, and state politics. But we don't just do news and opinion writing. In a field that is constantly changing and evolving, journalists are expected to do it all. We teach you how to do that at TNP. We regularly produce photo galleries, videos, podcasts like the one you're listening to, infographics, and so much more. And if you're interested in social media or public relations, there's a spot on our team for you, too. The clips you'll produce here will help you get the internship you want. By the end of my freshman year, I had multiple pieces of writing published on TNP's website, allowing me to pursue an internship at my local paper, the Butler Eagle, last summer. I've also met some of my best friends here at TNP, and we have a fantastic network of alumni working in journalism and strategic communications jobs as close as Athens or as far as New York City. If you have yet to find the student publication on campus that's the right fit, The New Political just might be the one for you. Our weekly all-staff meetings are held every Sunday night at 7 p.m. in Scripps Hall if you're interested in joining, and you can also reach out to me at sdonaldson@thenewpolitical.com.
Managing Editor Ben Peters on the Board of Elections' decision to disqualify Representative Jay Edwards' Democratic challenger, Kate O'Neill, from running for the Ohio House of Representatives in the general election. Hi, Ben. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm on the other end. I'm on the receiving end of the interview.
You are.
And this is strange.
It's very strange. Isn't it a little intimidating?
It is. I'm kind of scared.
That's so funny.
Not going to lie.
Oh, my gosh.
What are you going to throw at me?
Oh, well, my first question's a good one. Who is Kate O'Neill?
So Kate O'Neill is an Ohio U alumna who was challenging Representative Jay Edwards for his seat on the Ohio House of Representatives.
Okay. Why was she disqualified?
So there was this guy, a Nelsonville resident. I don't really know the significance of him. A guy named Alan Keith Monk. He filed a protest with the Athens County Board of Elections, alleging that O'Neill was not a resident of District 94, which is our Ohio House district here in Athens County, for at least a year prior to the upcoming election, and that she circulated petitions to run for office before becoming a registered voter in Athens County. That was reported by the Athens News.
Okay.
So then last Friday, or I should say 2 Fridays ago, by the time this will go up, the Board of Elections was split along party lines 2-2 over whether or not O'Neill was eligible to run for the Ohio House. But then it seemed like they received some sort of, quote, new information. They didn't expound on what that means or what that new information contained. That led them to finally declare that, yes, she is ineligible to run because she does not meet the residency requirements outlined in the Ohio Constitution, which do require a state representative to live within their district for at least a year before a general election date.
Okay. Do you know where she lived prior to the election?
No, so I should mention that this story, I did very little reporting for this.
Okay.
We needed somebody to cover it last minute. Cleveland.com broke it, so I aggregated Cleveland.com's story and I aggregated the Athens News just to compile, the general gist of what went on here. The only actual reporting I did was I called Jay Edwards and I asked for a comment on it. But we were going to Zach Zimmerman, staff writer Zach Zimmerman, who I've had interview other candidates who are running for office in 2020 and do a Q&A with them. I was going to have him find her and do an interview on her. And then we ended up not doing it because she was disqualified. So I didn't actually get a lot of time to delve deeper into who this character is.
Okay. So what did Jay Edwards have to say?
Yeah, so I called him up mid to late afternoon after this news broke, and he was like, kind of caught off guard. He was at some event. He was like, yeah, can I text you a little later and I'll give you a statement? I was kind of hoping for, something other than just the statement he gave to every other news organization. But so he gave this statement to both us and I think the Athens News. He said, "Some may view this as me not having an opponent, but I beg to differ. I have a much larger opponent every day as I go to Columbus to be a voice for Appalachia. For too long, we've been left behind. Regardless of an opponent on the ballot, given the opportunity to fight for Southeast Ohio, an area I was born and raised, is a much larger challenge that motivates me every day." So he wasn't really clear on who his opponent is, saying he doesn't have one.
Yeah.
But it's not that important, I guess. And the other interesting thing about this is, so Edwards is going to be running uncontested in the general election unless some independent challenger emerges that we don't know about. But O'Neill's name is still going to appear on the general election ballot because the filing deadline for candidates to register has already passed, and the ballot, for all intents and purposes, is probably mostly created right now. Finalized, I should say. And so the Board of Elections plans to mail disclaimers attached to absentee ballots explaining that any votes cast for O'Neill won't be counted in the final vote count because she is not a qualified candidate anymore.
Wow, that's interesting that they just now discovered that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's it. Thanks so much, Abby.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Up next, staff writer Eric Bohl is going to be talking about a planned esports facility that the university is investing in.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maggie Prosser, editor-in-chief here at The New Political. Each and every day, I work alongside reporters, editors, producers, and managers who put their heart and soul into the journalism we produce. Here at TNP, we have the honor to tell the stories of the residents of this small town we call home. We're looking for local businesses and other ventures to help us continue funding for our independent journalism, including the podcast you're listening to right now. TNP would love to advertise for you through our website, our biannual magazine, or right here on Athens Happens. If interested, please send an inquiry email to execedit@thenewpolitical.com for more details. We hope working together can support both your initiative and fuel TNP's strong, reliable, and essential journalism here in Athens.
Staff writer Eric Bohl on Ohio University's recently announced esports gaming facility and the educational opportunities it could afford students. How are you, Mr. Bohl?
Good. I met some friends at Latitude for dinner. I had a nice burger, so...
That was that. I used to work there, and then I quit. But that's okay. They have really good food there, I won't lie. So you wrote 2 stories, actually, about this new esports space. And what should people know about it?
So, first off, the Board of Trustees approved $650,000 for it. That's the pretty decent chunk of money. But from what I've heard, it is a bit on the low end. Because when you look at everything they have to do, it's going to be in the basement of the Scripps building, not Schoonover, which often get confused because the Scripps College of Communication is in Schoonover, but Scripps Hall is its own building.
We have a poster in my house that one of my roommates took from Schoonover that says, "This is Schoonover Center, not Scripps Hall. Scripps Hall is located across the street," and there's like a map showing where it is.
But it's going to be in the basement of Scripps Hall, right on like College Green, and it's 2,600 square feet. which decently sized space.
Yeah, it's a decent sized space. I've been there before.
So they have to remodel that space. So they're also going to have to put in probably some outlets, I can imagine, because they are estimating around 50 gaming computers. So that's going to require quite a bit of outlets.
Yeah.
They'll also have a few games consoles like Nintendo Switches, Sony PlayStation 4s, and Microsoft with the Xbox One. And then TVs for those. So that's a lot of electrical work that you already have to pay for. They're going to be working on potentially putting in a broadcast booth.
For what?
So the short answer is esports with an exclamation mark at the end. Because a lot of other schools have esports programs. Akron has a very well-established esports team. Miami has a esports team which actually won a big championship, I believe. I believe it was the it was the 2017 NACE Overwatch season. So, and Ashland University also has an esports program. So, a lot of schools already have these programs, and OU decided to be a little more cautious in case it was a bubble.
Yeah.
As it was described to me, and they decided to wait and join up on the later end.
Hopping into the gaming industry.
Yeah.
And investing resources into it.
Yeah. And we talked about how the space in Scripps is in the basement. Right now, it is a little small as someone who has been in that basement. And we talked about how there's always the possibility they could expand. They're just starting small just for safety reasons.
Okay.
But with the broadcast booth, now we're getting back into the broadcast aspect of esports. Esports has a very large broadcast market, like Twitch TV.
Yeah.
If you have heard of that, Twitch TV is it's a streaming website for those of you who don't know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of esports content that goes up on that website. A lot of major media companies have gotten into the esports game, ESPN, the Washington Post.
Yeah.
So
these are big spectator sports.
Yeah, these are very large spectator sports. And with the university already having esports teams, we have a League of Legends team, a Smash Bros team. These are all club sports, by the way. I should clarify that these are all clubs. League of Legends, Smash Brothers, Rocket League, Hearthstone, just to name like a few games. We already have these teams, and for these groups, they have described to me how it's kind of hard for them to practice because a good gaming PC can set you back around $1,500.
Yeah, they're expensive.
They are extremely expensive. But when talking to like the coaches for one of the teams, he described how a lot of his players have the potential to be really good, have the potential to be at like the top of the leaderboards, but they are gated because they are on student loans and they can't afford a $1,500 computer. But like with them having this potential new space with these high-end computers, it could take them to like the next level
of competition.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And there is another aspect to it, which, yay, esports, entertainment, all of that. There's also new academic opportunities that come with it. So I believe the university already has a class in the sports administration school. I can't remember the exact class number. That's essentially like esports and business. It's taught within the sports administration school, and OSU, Ohio State University, has an entire major around esports.
Really?
Yeah.
What is it?
It is described as being an interdisciplinary curriculum, goes across 5 colleges, and will focus on game studies, and esports is being developed on like the core of its program. So it's one of the first in like higher ed because let's be real, esports only came about in the past decade.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair statement.
I agree.
And the areas for the program we'll study will be like esports management. So managing a team, managing the finances for a team,
So does OU have aspirations of expanding their academic curriculum around gaming and esports to maybe create a major for, maybe a game design, or because I know right now they only have
they have the Grid Lab.
The Grid Lab, which is dedicated primarily to virtual reality and mixed reality research.
Yeah. So from talking to people, I've gathered that they may want to use the new facility to kind of potentially do some studies on how it affects the health of people. So there is a video from, I believe it is ESPN, where they hook up a pro player from the game League of Legends. His name's Pobelter. And ESPN, I believe it's ESPN Lab, I believe is the name of like the series. So what they do is they hook him up to a heart rate monitor, and they record his heart rate like throughout a game.
Mm-hmm.
And at the start of the game, his heart rate spikes up to like 140, I believe. And then it goes back down to around an 80 throughout the rest of the game. And it's ESPN Sports Science, my correction. And that's just an example that was shown to me of potentially what that facility could be used for.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that got mentioned was the facility could potentially be used for mental health checks. So we talked a little bit about how some people use games as like a form of escapism to kind of like not confront issues in their lives. And this is all tentative, because they're still deciding how they want the facility to work, whether you have so many hours you can play a semester, so many swipes you can use to go in and play in a semester, because other universities have facilities similar to this, and there's a variety of methods for kind of limiting the amount of time that people can go in and play. But essentially, I think the number that got thrown around was 90. I believe that was Akron University. They have a 90-hour limit for anyone to just come in and play throughout the semester. And if you go over that 90 hours limit, like you're red flagged and then you have to go talk to somebody. Teams would be an exception.
Okay.
But if I'm, regular Joe off the street, I can't go in there it's like similar to if I go to Ping and all I do is work out.
Yeah.
There's kind of a mental health check for like, if I go to Ping and I work out for 6 hours at a time, that's kind of not good for you physically.
Mm-hmm.
So my answer is I honestly I'm not really sure.
Okay.
But it was just a tentative idea they had.
Okay. So you've talked about research opportunities that this will provide for researchers. What academic opportunities does it present for students?
So first off, it is a place to see your games be played. So if I am a game developer at the university, I would have a ready base of people that I could use to test my game.
Yeah.
Because I could walk into this new facility and go, hey, I just developed this game. Would anyone be interested in giving it a test run? And that's an easy way to get feedback from actual gamers. Because you may have to just post it online, or you may have to ask people that you're friends with to play the game, which might not be the most honest criticism.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just go to this facility full of random strangers and you're like, here, I developed a game, would you guys be interested in playing it? Then you'll probably get some better feedback.
Is there anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Bull?
Just keep an eye on the program. It should be completed by, I'd say 2023. We'll certainly see this program implemented.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Yep. See you later.
And that wraps it up here on Athens Happens. Make sure to tune in every Friday for new episodes that shed light on the politics that impact all of our lives. Remember, you can find the show on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and on YouTube in a video podcast format. Don't forget to leave us ratings and reviews. Also, be sure to check out our website at thenewpolitical.com, where we regularly report stories on what really happens here in Athens, and follow @thenewpolitical on social media. Thank you all so much. Have a great weekend.